I thought that it would be really cool to do this book review on The Body Keeps the Score from the point of view of someone who has experienced sexual abuse in her childhood and is trying to move forward with her life. And it's really interesting. I've gone through the prologue and the first chapter so far, so I'm just gonna go chapter by chapter basis and do one once a week. I'm gonna try it once a week, maybe a little longer, but we're gonna do this. So when I first got this book, it was an audio book. This was like a few years back, and I couldn't stand to listen to it. The numbers, the statistics, it was just really hard to hear. And now, like, because I just think that what I want to say about trauma and facing the trauma is I think that we come to a place in our lives when we're finally ready to confront certain demons that have been created by it, certain hauntings that have been created by it, certain, like, scariness about it, right? Like the fears of facing the ways that it's changed us, the ways that it's made us, the ways that those things that it's done to us psychologically, mentally, emotionally, how we're living because of that, right? So to face it means, okay, I want to face this thing so that it's no longer impacting me. For me, it's relationships, and in the book it also states that very clearly, that that's like the biggest thing from trauma survivors is like how it affects our relationships specifically. And so as we're facing it, it's like, okay, I'm going to face this thing, and it feels like it's almost like it gets louder before, like it almost like in your face before you could actually let go. And I'm still in the process of learning how to let go as it in my face a couple years ago as I faced it. And I just really want to figure all this out, me out. And sometimes, and I'm like getting emotional about it, because sometimes I feel like I can't escape myself and my thoughts and the feelings that I have in these moments when I'm like in a trigger or feeling just so overwhelmed and insecure and afraid of like trusting and loving, and the ways that my mind creates stories around that narrative. So I'm sharing this from a place of just curiosity, and also because this is what I want to do. I want to figure this out so that I can help others figure it out too. Okay. So the prologue, the initial chapter is talking about how essentially he's gotten involved, the author is Bessel van der Kolk. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he essentially he starts it off with talking about how the research by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention show that 1 in 5 Americans has been sexually molested as a child. 1 in 4 was beaten by parents to the point of marking on their bodies, and then 1 in 3 couples engaged in physical violence. So a quarter, coming up with stats, right? Like a quarter of us grow up with alcoholic relatives, and 1 in 8 witness their mother being beaten or hit. So he just starts off with saying how many of us are really impacted by trauma, and how when you're exposed to family violence as a child, it makes it difficult to establish stable, trusting relationships as an adult. And then he goes on to say that we, those that have experienced trauma, try to push it out of our minds, trying to act as if nothing happened and move on. It takes tremendous energy to keep functioning while carrying the memory of terror and the shame of utter weakness and vulnerability, right? Talking about it, sharing it, it makes us feel weak and vulnerable. I hated the word victim for the longest time. So we just try to like, yeah, okay, I just want to move on with my life. And I remember saying that so many times. Like, God's got it. Like, it's fine. Like, whatever. This man, I assume, is like very old, because he talks about his experience in the 80s and 90s as he was becoming a psychiatrist and the people that he's worked with, and basically like the development of psychology and the knowledge that has been now, what we know now compared to 50 years ago. And the new disciplines are neuroscience, the study of how the brain supports mental processes, which I learned about in college, and I was so fascinated by something called neuroplasticity, where essentially you can regrow, right? This is what actually gave me hope, I think, in college, although that was just like the scratching surface point of it. Developmental psychopathology, the study of the impact of adverse experiences on the development of the mind and brain. So how these things impact the development of your mind and brain. And then interpersonal neurobiology, the study of how our behavior influences the emotions, biology, and mindsets of those around us. So how we impact others around us. And you know, we talk about, you hear about generational trauma all the time. So this really is what that is, right? Like, it's a constant, like, I'm just giving down. We've been given down what has been given to them. And then he goes on to say, we now know that trauma compromises the brain area that communicates the physical embodied feeling of being alive. These changes explain why traumatized individuals become hypervigilant to threat at the expense of spontaneously engaging in their day-to-day lives. They also help us understand why traumatized people so often keep repeating the same problems and have such trouble learning from experience. We now know that their behaviors are not the result of moral failings or signs of lack of willpower or bad character. They are caused by actual changes in the brain. There's been so many times when I'm just like, this isn't even working. I'm broken. It's not possible for me. And I mean, I felt that way today, earlier this morning, and I've had a rough week, but I have felt this way so many times, and I've also felt being on the other side of it so many times. Like, okay, it's just a moment, and my challenge for me is separating the moment of having a hard moment, ugly thought, or a trigger, to like forever. It's like I start to feel like it's not working, I'm broken, and all that shit. So I'm really trying to get a grasp on that. But these things help, and my hope is that those people that are curious about this book and that have looked it up can find this video and hear someone like me who has experienced trauma and is facing it, go through the process of reading it and how it's like helping me understand my brain. And my hopes is to also understand all the ways in which to heal, the processes that this guy has learned over the years. We can now develop methods and experiences that utilize the brain's own natural neuroplasticity to help survivors feel fully alive in the present and move on with their lives. And then he says there are 3 avenues: top down, by talking, reconnecting with others, and allowing ourselves to know and understand what is going on with us while processing the memories of trauma. Number 2, by taking medications that shut down inappropriate alarm reactions, or by utilizing other technologies that change the way the brain organizes information. And then 3, bottom up, by allowing the body to have experiences that deeply and viscerally contradict the helplessness, rage, or collapse that result from the trauma. Which one of these is best? He says that it's a combination. So that's the prologue. And then at the end is the challenge is how can people gain control over the residues of past trauma and return to being masters of their own ship. That's what I want. We will also see that the imprints from the past can be transformed by having physical experiences that directly contradict the helplessness, rage, and collapse that are part of the trauma, right? All right, part 1. So chapter 1 is essentially him talking about how he worked with, this is in 1978. So he worked as a staff psychiatrist at the Boston Veterans Administration Clinic, and he started to see these soldiers that were coming in having, really big issues, and just the ways in which they had these, what did he call them? The way that they outwardly acted as a effect of post-war. And then he says he was talking to some gentleman named Tom who was a veteran, and he wondered if my uncle, his own uncle, and my father had nightmares and flashbacks too. Had they felt disconnected from their loved ones and unable to find any real pleasures in their lives. Somewhere in the back of my mind, there must also have been my memories of my frightened and own frightening mother, whose own childhood trauma was sometimes alluded to, and I now believe was frequently reenacted. She had the unnerving habit of fainting when I asked her what her life was like as a little girl, and then blaming me for making her so upset. So just like seeing how it's challenging to, talk about these things. So, and then one of the questions is how do horrific experiences cause people to become hopelessly stuck in the past? Oh, okay, yeah. So this guy, Tom, right, he had nightmares or whatever, and so he was a psychiatrist, and he gave him pills to go to sleep, because he's like, well, I don't know much about trauma at that time in 1978, but, or about veterans coming back from war, but I do know about nightmares and nightmares. Here's this medication, because he was like working with people that in a night, like sleep studies before. So he gave him the medication, and the guy did not take the medication after 2 weeks. And he's like, the guy, Tom, said, I realized that if I take the pills and the nightmares go away, that I would have abandoned my friends, and their deaths will have been in vain. I need to be a living memorial to my friends who died in Vietnam. And he was stunned that his loyalty was to the dead. And the question he asked himself at that moment was, how do horrific experiences cause people to become hopelessly stuck in the past? What happens in people's minds and brains that keep them frozen, trapped in place they desperately wish to escape? Why did this man's war not come to an end in February 1969 when his parents picked him up? And that he noticed that a lot of these veterans had behavior that was scary. Like they had a lack of self-control and self-regulation that they had lost in the war. And he goes on to say that after the war, his patients were overtaken by a sense of futility. They became withdrawn and detached. It's what we call today post-traumatic stress disorder. Develop a chronic vigilance for and sensitivity to threat. And that it's not all in one's head. It's, as some people suppose, but has a psychological basis, right? The way our brain kind of develops from that trauma, or how it changes from that trauma. And then he also went on to say that because he didn't have any experience in trauma, that he remembered from his teacher that said his patients are the best ones to get your experience from. But he also said, it sounded simple, but even though that's true, human beings are experts in wishful thinking and obscuring the truth. He goes on to say, we really don't know how or what soldiers go through in combat. We do not really want to know how many children are being molested and abused in our own society, or how many couples, almost a third as it turns out, engage in violence at some point during the relationship. We want to think of families as a safe haven. So all of that led into the fact that it's not just people that are going through wars that experience trauma, but he shared some statistics. I think it's at the end of this chapter that said, For many people, the war begins at home. Each year, about 3 million children in the U.S. are reported as victims of child abuse and neglect. 1 million of these cases are serious and credible enough to take action. And for every soldier who serves in war zone abroad, there are 10 children who are endangered in their own homes. 12 million women in the United States have been victims of rape. More than half of all rapes occur in girls below age 15. And so, from his experience to just kind of understanding how these men in particular, he went from working with other people that were traumatized, like women that have been sexually abused, after he had worked for like 20 years with veterans, and he noticed that there was a correlation between how the veterans responded in their flashbacks and their behaviors, and also how these women responded. And one of the things that he noticed was, when he was working with the gentlemen, the veterans, was that you were either in or out. You either belonged to the unit or you were nobody, right? That was the kind of mentality. After trauma, the world becomes sharply divided between those who know and those who don't know. People who have not shared the traumatic experience cannot be trusted because they can't understand it. Sadly, this often includes spouses, children, and coworkers. And I definitely experienced that, right? Where it's like, yeah, but you don't get it because you didn't go through it. Especially with my partner, because like, you're a dude, you don't get it. Like, you don't get it, bro. Like, you don't get why I feel the way I feel. You don't get why I don't trust. You don't get like this feelings of anxiety that I have just because I'm a woman. And it's this like in or out mentality. So I definitely related with that. And even though he's saying he shared that he would do like groups and stuff, and even though these men had experiences 10, 20, 30 years before, that somehow the very event that caused them so much pain had also become their sole source of meaning. They felt fully alive only when they were revisiting their traumatic past. And that also felt like something that I resonate. I mean, I've made my whole life around it, right? Like, I am a personal trainer and a fitness coach at Orange Theory. I have clients that I work with at the gym. I have life coaching clients, but my passion is to understand like what has transpired, how have I changed, and how could I help other women also change and have hope, because I didn't even have hope to be where I'm at now today. So to see my life change in the next 5 or 10 years, I know it will be beautiful. Even that moment, it's like, how will I ever get there? And so it's almost become like an obsession. But what I'm trying to do is make the obsession the growth and the transformation and the way forward and the sharing of this with others, as opposed to like getting stuck into like, well, this is why I am this way. But apparently that's a thing. So yeah, turning point arrived in 1980 when they created a new diagnosis, PTSD. So before, they were like, you know, there was like schizophrenia. They like gave them medications. They lock them up in places. There was no actual diagnosis, so that they could have more research, so they could have more ways of finding effective treatments. So that was cool. And then when he left that job, so because they weren't in like, because where he was at, as he was going to school to become a psychiatrist, I think it was like it's a whole process, right, to become a psychiatrist. So he went from one place to another because he left this place because they didn't agree at the time that there was like this thing called PTSD, and he just couldn't. So he went to this other job, and now he was working with women, and he was particularly struck by how many females patients spoke about being sexually abused as children. And at the time, this is in 1980, at the time, what was the book? The standard textbook of psychiatry at the time stated that incest was extremely rare in the United States, occurring about once in every million women. Given that there were then only about 100 million women living in the United States, I wondered how 47, almost half of them, had found their way to my office in the basement of the hospital. So it was like fascinating for him, because it was like, this is not supposed to be happening. Like, this is not a thing, right? But yet 47 of these, you know, 1 in a million, there should only be if there was 1 in a million, but 47 of them had found him, and they were similar to the veterans that had been in wars, profoundly depressed, confused, and often engaged in bizarrely self-harmful behaviors, such as cutting themselves. In many ways, these patients were not so different from the veterans I had just left behind at the VA. They also had nightmares and flashbacks. They also alternated between occasional bouts of explosive rage and long periods of being emotionally shut down. That is like literally me. There's moments where I'm like, I don't know what to do with this anger. I don't know what to do with this rage. And and then I just like emotionally shut myself off and want to be alone and just feel like most of them had great difficulty getting along with other people and had trouble maintaining meaningful relationships. As we all know, war is not the only calamity that leaves human lives in ruins. While about a quarter of the soldiers who serve in war zones are expected to develop serious post-traumatic problems, the majority of Americans experience a violent crime at some time during their lives. And then he goes into those stats that I read earlier that revealed 12 million women in the United States have been rape victims. More than half of all rapes occur in girls aged below 15. For many people, the war begins at home. Every year, about 3 million children in the U.S. are reported victims of child abuse and neglect, and 1 million of those cases are serious and credible enough to force local child protective services or the courts to take action. And then he goes to say, in other words, for every soldier who serves in the war zone abroad, there are 10 for every one who are endangered in their own homes. And then he goes on to end the chapter with trauma results in fundamental reorganization of the way mind and brain manage perceptions. It changes not only how we think and what we think about, but also our very capacity to think. We have discovered that helping victims of trauma find the words to describe what has happened to them is profoundly meaningful, but usually it is not enough. The act of telling the story doesn't necessarily alter the automatic physical and hormonal responses of the body that remain hypervigilant, prepared to be assaulted and violated at any time. For real change to take place, the body needs to learn that danger has passed and to live in the reality of the present. Our search to understand trauma has led to think differently, not only about the structures of the mind, but the processes by which it heals. And I'm assuming those processes by which it heals are the things that we will learn. So I hope that this piqued your interest. Maybe it was hard for you to read. Maybe just having someone like myself read it with you or go through it or summarize it helps you. And yeah, let me know in the comments below what was your biggest takeaway, and I hope to see you guys in chapter 2.